Look out for, in the first instance, mottes. Because, as we said, the Norman conquest is really when castles are introduced to England on a huge scale. So if you see a great artificial mound of earth, then that's almost certainly dating from the late 11th or early 12th century, certainly if you're in England. And they vary in size. They can be quite modest, or they can be huge. Things like somewhere like Tunbridge in Kent, for example, just something that would have taken months to build. And that's the thing you can reflect upon if you see a mott is, although it is essentially a large mound of earth, you can't put that up overnight. I mean, just in terms of moving the earth, it's going to take thousands of man hours. But also you can't just make it out of one type of, like a railway embankment. You can't just make it out of mud. It's just going to, slip away. So you have to build it with layers. You have to put a layer of clay, a layer of stone, a layer of sand, a layer of mud, So they are consolidated artificial hills. They would have to be in order to bear the weight of the stone buildings that later are built on top. Another thing you might look out for are wells, or the castle's main well, because that's obviously going to be essential. In the day-to-day you're living in a castle, it saves you having to go down to the river as your source of water. But in a siege, it becomes absolutely essential because, you can be hungry and last out another couple of weeks, but you can't be thirsty. It's one of the terrible things. As a medieval historian, you do have to sort of, look into things like how quickly does it take to starve to death? I've looked at these questions. And you can go without food for 2 or 3 weeks, but you can't go without water for more than 2 or 3 days. Maybe you might last a week. Then that'd be it. So you need a well, basically. And the thing to think about wells, I think, is when you see them, obviously the first thing you do is chuck a coin down to see how deep they are. And sometimes it's a disappointing half a second and it just goes splosh. But sometimes they can be jolly deep. If you go to Dover Castle, which I think is the deepest in Britain, and you toss a coin down there, or a stone, it's a good 7 to 8 seconds before you hear it go splosh. It's incredibly deep. And the thing to think about there, I think, is just what an incredible feat of engineering that is. I've come back to this several times in the course of the podcast, but it's astonishing, and it gives the lie to the idea that the Middle Ages were somehow crude in terms of their engineering skills. The third thing is twin-towered gatehouses, something that I referred to in passing in the podcast. Early castles, 11th and 12th centuries, their entrances are to a large extent unimpressive. I'm talking about not the entrances to the towers, but you have a set of walls around your castle, your outer walls, and getting in often, sometimes it's literally just a hole in the wall. Other times it's a tower with a gateway through it. But what you get from around about the year 1200 and going forwards thereafter are 2 towers pushed together. So that's your twin-towered gatehouse, and the entrance is between the 2 towers. And so if you spot that, and of course by this stage they've got all the kind of the elaborate tricks that you associate with castle defences. So you'll have arrow loops all around, so facing forwards, and arrow loops crossing the entrance, so you've got a field of fire against potential intruders. You'll see as you go through the twin-towered gatehouse and look up or look to the side, you will see grooves in the walls for portcullises to be lowered and slots in the ceiling for them to disappear into. You'll almost certainly, if you look up as well, see holes as you go through the entrance passage, which are so-called murder holes, which you can chuck traditionally boiling oil, but pretty much anything you like that's nasty, quicklime or something, to boiling water to frustrate your attackers. So that's a good sort of a marker of like, we're into the later Middle Ages now. We're certainly beyond 1200 if you see a twin-towered gatehouse. A fourth thing would be Potlog Holes. So Potlog Holes, or Potlog Holes, are literally holes in which you put logs, and they are holes in the masonry where the scaffolding, the original scaffolding, was. And because this sounds kind of like a builder not finishing the job properly, but because these buildings were whitewashed and plastered and whitewashed on the outside or painted over, rather than taking the scaffolding down and then filling the hole with a block, they often just kind of sawed off the log and left the log in situ. So you can often see where the scaffolding was if you look for holes on the outer surface of the castle walls. Often they are at a horizontal level, So they are just, a line of holes for a platform. In some cases, in the case of Edward I's castles in northwest Wales, the Potlog holes on the towers spiral around the towers as if there'd been a helter-skelter effect, which is one of the ways that indicates that Edward I's castles in northwest Wales were built by continental masons, Savoyard masons, rather than English ones. And lastly, I've said Maculations and gun loops. So we mentioned Maculations in the podcast. Maculations are where the wall head, the fighting platform, is built out from the wall. So theoretically, you could drop things down on people's heads. I think one of the reasons, though, that people like Maculations going into the 14th and 15th centuries is because they look pretty. I mean, they just it's the way you make your castle look like it's permanently wearing a crown is to matriculate the towers. But as I say, earliest examples, 1280s Northwest Wales with Edward I. Realistically, by the time that catches on, you're well into the 14th and into the 15th century. So if you see Maculations around the top of your towers, you know you are dealing with a late medieval castle.